Thank you so much for coming. This evening, we're going to talk a little bit around beyond writing and fine motor developments throughout the developmental phases, but also into the kinder years. So before we start, I'd just like to introduce myself. For those of you that haven't been to any of our previous webinars, my name is Kate and I'm the owner of Upside Down Therapy. I'm one of the senior therapists as well that work at the clinic. We are based in Alderley in Brisbane. I'm originally from South Africa and completed my Bachelor of Occupational Therapy in 2011. And since then, I've completed numerous professional development courses, specifically around sensory processing, but also around childhood development, aspects such as feeding and toileting, and also understanding neurodiversity. I've worked across health and special education systems in South Africa. And since immigrating to Australia just over 5.5 years ago, I've worked within the private practice sector, providing early intervention services to children with varying challenges and diagnoses. Besides being an OT and a business owner, I'm also a co-trainer with Sense Up Training. Together with my colleague Kerry Ebbets, we complete the annual Sensory in Action workshops across Australia every year. I'm also co-owner of Australian company equipment business called Sensory U, where we manufacture and sell sensory and therapy equipment to parents and other professionals. And aside from all things work-related, I'm also a mum of my 3 beautiful children. We also have neurodiversity in our family, so I also have lived experiences with children with neurodiversity. And my real passion is providing early intervention services and obviously all things sensory. Collaboration is one of our most important values. I feel that when we can work together with early childhood educators and our parents and our families and team members of the child, we can see the child holistically and ensure that we can create the best version of themselves. So when we think about handwriting, we often think about the little fingers that hold those little pencils. But the truth is that writing is just the tip of the iceberg. So when we have a look at this iceberg model, you can see at the top of the iceberg is the handwriting, but beneath the handwriting is all the different areas that need to be developed before we actually do handwriting. So you can see there's postural control, there's core strength, there's shoulder stability. The child needs bilateral coordination. They need well-developed fine and gross motor skills. They need to have developed their hand preference or dominance. They need to be able to integrate their visual and their motor systems. They need good finger strength and dexterity. They need to be able to cross the midline of their body. Good tactile processing of their fingers. They need proprioceptive processing to understand how hard they need to hold their pencil, how much pressure they need to apply when writing. They need good attention skills in order to take in the information. They need to be well regulated. They have to have language skills. They need executive functioning of memory and concentration and problem solving, decision making. They need visual perceptual skills to understand what the information that they're seeing. They need good motor planning to be able to form their letters correctly. They need good ocular motor skills in order to track and visually see the items that they need to write. So it's really important that we don't just look at handwriting, because that is essentially just the tip of the iceberg. So tonight we're going to explore things beyond writing. So we're going to be covering all those topics and explore what truly supports the development of fine motor skills in young children and how we can spot those early signs of difficulty, but most importantly, what we can do to help children build strength, build control, build their confidence so that they can succeed when they need to do handwriting. So when we have a look at this picture, I want you all just to think about what all these activities have in common. You're welcome to put your answers in the chat group, but otherwise just have a little think, looking at each picture individually. What is it that all these children are doing? So yeah, these children are all using their hands. They're all using those fine motor skills to hold, to grasp, to manipulate, to move. And these are all essential skills that support those underlying factors of handwriting. So let's start with the basics. What is fine motor skills? So fine motor skills are those small, precise movements that we make with our hands and fingers. And it's often in coordination when we use our eyes. These skills involve the coordination of the muscles of our hands and fingers that allow for tasks like reaching and grasping, holding tools like a pencil or a fork, even manipulating buttons, for example, and essentially for handwriting. But if fine motor skills don't develop in isolation, we rely on a whole network of underlying skills in the body and brain that we saw in the iceberg model on the previous slide to help develop these fine motor skills. So when we're thinking about fine motor skills, they're really important for self-care tasks. So for a child to be able to feed themselves, so using utensils like knives and forks, or even opening up lunch boxes, for example. Fine motor skills are really important for dressing. So being able to manipulate buttons or open and close zippers or do their shoelaces. It's important for grooming tasks, for them to be able to brush their teeth, even for managing toilet paper for going to the toilet. For academic tasks, so helping them with writing, drawing, coloring, being able to use and cut scissors. It's also important for recreational play activities. So, for example, a child using their hands to manipulate Lego pieces or building with blocks. And I'm sure we see a lot of these skills being used in the kindergarten classrooms as well. So being able to dress their dollies, being able to manipulate objects during imaginative play. Maybe they are playing Barbies, or maybe they are, playing with their dinosaurs or cars and building car tracks and roads. They're also essential for other day activities. So, for example, being able to turn on taps in the home environment, being able to open doors using a knob or a handle, being able to use their iPads. We know how important our iPads are these days, and just being able to open up general containers as well. So when children have difficulties with fine motor skills, it can then often lead to frustration. It can often lead to avoidance of activities. Our kids have reduced self-esteem, and they often have difficulty with school and play. So if you're just focusing on handwriting, we're totally missing that bigger picture. So to understand and support fine motor growth, we need to look beyond the hands, okay? So we need to look at postural control or core strength. So whether a child is able to maintain their posture, or do they slump or lean on their arms? Are they using their energy to hold themselves up instead of focusing on their hands? And we often find this, even if just the child's sitting on the mat during mat work or group time, we often see kids wriggling around and having difficulty with concentrating, and that's because they have poor postural control. Core stability also allows them for the freedom of movement in their arms and hands. So if a child doesn't have good postural control or good core strength, they're going to have difficulty with being able to use the dexterity, so using their arms and their hands. They need to have shoulder and arm stability. So if you can imagine, the shoulder is like an anchor for the hand. So if the anchor is weak or unstable, so if the shoulder is weak or unstable, the hand movements will become shaky and less controlled as well. Bilateral integration or bilateral coordination is another important factor. So this is when we are able to use both sides of the body to work together quite smoothly. So for example, if a child is holding paper with one hand and using scissors with the other hand, they're able to use both hands simultaneously with quite a good skill to coordinate those movements. Another one, for example, if a child needs to hold the jar with one hand and then they use the other hand to open up the lid. Even opening up a tube of toothpaste, for example, is an example of this. They need to have well-established hand dominance. So most children start showing a clear hand preference around 3 years of age, and around 4 years we should have a clear dominant side where the child is able to determine which is going to be their most skilled hand. But if they're still switching hands past this age, it might impact the consistency and coordination, especially for tasks like handwriting, where they're requiring quite refined skill. Separation of the hand. So this is where the hand is actually divided into two roles. So the one side is the power side, which is your ring and your little finger, and that's generally our stabilizing side. And then our precision side is where we use our thumb, our index, and our middle fingers. And this is more for detailed work. We often call that our tripod grip. Children need to develop the ability to isolate both sides of their hand for better control. Another key component is in-hand manipulation. So this means that the child is able to move objects around inside the hand. So for example, flipping a pencil to use the eraser, or even being able to move their fingers down to the end of the pencil if they're positioned too high up on the pencil shaft. Another example would be transferring pennies. So being able to pick up a penny and keep it in their hand and hold it there while picking up another one, or counters, for example. Grasp patterns is another one that's really important. So children move through different grasp stages, which we'll cover in a few slides, where they first start off with using a whole hand, called it a palmar grasp, and then that will then move into a mature tripod grasp, where they need to use their thumb, their index, and their middle fingers to hold the pencil. And a functional grasp typically develops by the end of the kindergarten year, but there can still be some variability, which we'll cover in the coming slides. Another really important factor to have is visual motor integration. So this is where we're able to coordinate what the eyes see with what the hands do. So for example, if a child is trying to copy something off the board, or copy shapes, or copy a drawing, or even building with blocks, so being able to copy an image. So if you can imagine when a child receives a box of Lego that they have to build, they'll get a little picture, and they need to then obviously coordinate their hands to build what they can see. And if a child struggles here, you might see the difficulty with reversals. So often we'll find reversals in handwriting, or they might have poor spacing, or they might have difficulty building puzzles, or being able to orientate their work on a page appropriately. And all these components, so all these foundational building blocks, is what work together to help children participate in everyday tasks. And it's not just for handwriting. So I found this really interesting X-ray, and on the left we can see the hand, and this is a hand of a typically developing kindy age child, and on the right is a hand of a typically developing 7-year-old. So what's immediately clear is just how unfinished the younger hand is. So the bones are still forming, and what looks like to be much of that space between the X-ray is actually soft cartilage. So this is where the bone has not fully developed just yet. And this is one of the reasons why many young children simply aren't ready to write when they are told to, or when they are expected to. Their hands are still growing, their muscles are still strengthening, and they're still figuring out how to work together in a coordinated way. So the best thing that we can all do is to try and encourage play, so that these children can first develop the strength and coordination and the control that they need before they go into handwriting. And this is how we're going to develop that success. And when children feel successful, they want to engage, and they're more willing to engage in these difficult tasks. When children are not physically or developmentally ready, our job, they won't do it. So we need to ensure that we can develop all those skills. But our job is to focus on giving them those rich, playful experiences that will prepare them for that. So what we also need to remember is consistency and coordination when we're using tasks like writing. All right. So fine motor development follows a very clear and essential developmental sequence, which starts from the core and then it works its way out to the fingers. So how we spoke about postural control and core muscles, and then it develops all the way out. So it all begins with this beautiful developmental phase of tummy time in infancy. So we're all familiar with this phase. And we always wonder, why is it so important? Why is it so important? Tummy time helps develop core strength. It helps develop neck. So if you look at this little baby in the picture, you can see it's developing their neck muscles, it's working on shoulder muscles, and it's setting the child up for success so that they have that really strong foundation to be able to use the really controlled movements that they need for their arms and their legs at a later stage. As babies grow, they will start crawling, they'll start climbing over things, they'll start pulling up, and they'll start weight bearing through their arms and their legs. And these activities will then strengthen and build the shoulders, the elbows, and the wrists, and essentially building bilateral coordination, or using both sides of the body, will then sort of be developing the child's confidence in using fine motor tasks, fine motor equipment and tools. And then once the bigger joints are stable, we'll then start to see those more refined movements of the hand and wrist. So they might even start crawling up slopes. They might start using vertical surfaces. They might use pushing toys. And all these activities will then build wrist extension and hand strength that will be crucial for pencil control at a later stage. Next, that child will then begin to move their fingers more independently. And instead of grasping with the whole hand, so what we often see in our little infants, they'll now start picking up small items. They'll start manipulating them, and they might use more precise movements of the hand. And at this stage, it's a really important phase for things like introducing beading or getting the child to start turning pages in a book. And then this is when you'll start seeing them using cutlery as well. Over time, children will then begin to favor one hand, and that will become their dominant hand. They'll learn to cross their midline, so they'll be able to use their dominant hand to move across the whole body without needing to switch their items that they're holding to the other hand. And this is a key step for fluid and efficient writing and tool use. So if you imagine when you're writing with your right hand, you have to start on the left side of your page. So that's really important for writing. Even moving your eyes across the midline in order to read. So if you're looking at the board, you might be starting reading from the left-hand side of the page or the board, and your eyes will then have to move across the imaginary midline of our body to the right-hand side. And then finally, once all those foundations are in place, we'll start seeing more of those refined grasp patterns, like a tripod grasp for writing. The children will now be able to control pressure, they might be able to adjust hand movements, and they can build stamina for longer tasks, like when they get to school and they need to do more longer passages of writing or drawing. So rather than jumping straight into writing, we need to ensure that all these early stages have been well supported. And we can imagine if a child has had delayed milestones or they haven't had enough time to develop a skill area, then we need to slow down and go back and ensure that these are all well developed. And each one of these stages will play a vital role in getting the hands and brain ready for fine motor success. Okay, and we can do that through play. So let's go through some of the developmental milestones. So these are all the foundations before we use pencils. So from birth to 12 months, in the first 3 months, children or infants will reflexively grasp objects placed in their hand, and they may start bringing their hands to their mouth. Between 3 and 6 months, they'll hold objects with their thumb tucked in, and they will bring their hands together, and they might even start reaching for toys. They might start holding a rattle in their hand briefly to shake. By 6 to 9 months, our kids will be shaking and banging rattles, and they'll be transferring objects between their hands. And this is at the stage they start using a raking grasp to pick up small objects. So they don't yet have those fine precision grips and grasps just yet, but they're starting to rake grasps into the palm of their hands. By 9 to 12 months, or just before a year, they start releasing objects voluntarily. They can bang toys together. They'll be able to start turning pages in a book. They can start putting objects in a container. They'll start pointing to objects and stacking 2 blocks together. But 12 to 18 months, this is when children start clapping their hands. So they'll be starting to use both hands quite skillfully. They'll be able to put objects into containers, so we can start doing posting games with them. They're starting to use their hands to wave bye-bye. They can use both hands in play. They're starting to isolate their index fingers so they can start pointing. They start scribbling with crayons, and they use a spoon and a cup. By 18 to 24 months, they'll be able to build a block tower. They may be able to put rings onto a ring stacker. They'll be able to turn pages of book one by one with more skill. And they might even start holding crayons with their fingertips and a thumb. By 2 to 5 years, they will start using, or at 2 years, they'll start using a spoon and a fork. They should be able to now build a tower of 3 to 4 blocks. They might even start stringing some large beads onto a shoelace. By 3 years, they'll be building tower blocks of 8 to 10 at stacking. They'll be able to use scissors properly. So this is when they'll start understanding how to hold a pair of scissors. They should be able to hold a pencil between their thumb and their forefinger and screw and unscrew small lids. By 4 years, they should be cutting along a line, or at least being able to coordinate that movement to open and close the scissors. They should be able to coordinate their hands to brush their teeth, and they should be able to copy a 9-block model. About 5 years, we should be seeing that the child is drawing pictures, exploring more of those fine motor tasks of painting, and learning to print writing. They should start building, doing buttons, large buttons, and even placing small objects into a bottle. So let's shift the focus from, is this child ready to write, to a more important question is this child developing those fine motor skills that are important? So handwriting readiness is about more than just those fine motor skills, and it includes a combination of those physical, cognitive, and emotional factors that prepare a child to engage in writing tasks successfully. So when we're looking at those readiness indicators to tell us whether or not the child is ready, things that we want to look out for is does the child have a stable sitting posture? So can they sit upright with their feet well supported, which will allow them the movement of their hands and their arms? Are they able to imitate or copy basic shapes? So lines, so vertical lines. Can they draw crosses? Can they draw a circle? Can they draw a triangle and a square? So as we know, our letters are made up of various shapes and patterns, and we call these pre-writing patterns. So are they able to draw basic shapes and patterns? Are they able to isolate their fingers and have good grasp control? So are they able to use their fingers independently, so not just having a mass grasp? So often we still see kids with very big mass grasps, and that's just something that we need to monitor and to see what could be causing that. Is there interest and willingness? So motivation is so important at this stage. Are they curious about letters? Are they curious about books? Do they want to draw? Are they interested in that? Hand preference, are they beginning to show consistency in their hand preference? Because it's really important that kids are able to develop the skill that they need for developing the dominance and the skills in those hands. So I just wanted to talk about some of those misconceptions. So common myths that we might see is that children need to be able to write their name before prep. While we do start encouraging tracing letters and identifying their name during kinder year, but it's actually more important to focus on them being able to recognize their name and also make marks that have meaning. So name writing can come when those foundations are ready. We don't want to force it, but for those kids that are ready, it is encouraged. Children need to have the perfect pencil grip. So grasps have really developed over time, and many of our young children still use transitional grasps. So what's really important here is to focus on function. So is the grasp functional, and is it comfortable, so it's not causing pain, and is it not causing fatigue? Okay, so we look at focus, function, and comfort, not necessarily perfection. And as children develop those fine motor skills, their grasp will become more refined. Fine motor is pencil work. So true fine motor development includes things like being able to do buttons and zips and Lego and Play-Doh and threading and self-care tasks and imaginative play. These are the real building blocks. So that is true fine motor skills. All child develop fine motor skills at the same pace. No, actually individual development timelines can vary significantly from child to child, and things that we can factor in is genetics, neurological wiring, the environment, so how much they've had exposure to it, their personality, so are they motivated by doing fine motor tasks, and what is considered on time for one child might not necessarily be for another. Another one is struggles with fine motor skills are due to lack of effort. So while effort is certainly a factor, and it's an important factor, a child's struggles may also stem from those underlying challenges, like mentioned before, like developmental delays or difficulty with visual motor integration or even eyesight. So it's important to first factor in those different reasons when we assess a child's fine motor development. But handwriting readiness is holistic. So a child is ready to write not just because they've been given a pencil, but because their body and their brain and their emotions are ready. All right, so let's talk about sensory integration and fine motor skills. So As occupational therapists, we look beneath the surface when it comes to handwriting and fine motor development. And one of the foundations that we'll look at is sensory processing. So I did do a big webinar on sensory processing. So if you're not familiar with this term, you're welcome to go back to, I think it's the first webinar that we did on sensory processing and impacts on behavior. And this is essentially how the brain receives, interprets, and responds to messages from the body and from their environment. So when a child can process that information that they get effectively, they're more likely to feel calm and coordinated and being able to control their movements more fluently. So we'll break it down into a few of the sensory processing areas. So the one sensory processing area that we have is our proprioceptive system. So this is our body awareness system. And this helps children know where their arms and their hands and even their fingers are in space. This sense is crucial for controlling our pencil pressure or how hard they are pressing, but also being able to know how much pressure they need to apply to hold the pencil in their hand for effective tool use. Another area that we look at is visual processing or visual perception. So it goes beyond the eyesight, okay? So when it comes to processing, it's about how the brain is able to make sense of what the eyes see. So the first step would obviously be eyesight, so how much acuity they have, but processing is how then the brain processes the information that the child sees. So this is really important for spacing letters, for being able to copy shapes, or writing from a board, even tracking the text from left to right for reading. Our next system is our vestibular system. So this system is responsible for balance and movement, and it impacts how well the child can sit upright and maintain attention. If that system is underdeveloped, you might see a lot of slouching, you might see constant movement, and you might see a lot of fatigue from the child when they're required to sit at the desk or at the table. Tactile processing, again, affects how a child uses tools. So if a child is under-responsive, they may grip a pencil too hard, or they might not be able to adjust the grip. If they're over-responsive, they might have difficulty engaging in fine motor tasks like using glue or paint. So they might avoid those types of tasks. But regulation is so important for a child as well. So if their sensory systems aren't regulated, or they're feeling overloaded or understimulated by their sensory systems, fine motor tasks can become really hard work or even impossible for them to develop effectively. So we'll go through some of the other areas now and of those underlying factors that impact fine motor development and handwriting. So as we mentioned previously, postural control is a really important factor that we first and foremost would need to look at before a child is able to do fine motor skills effectively. So this is our ability to maintain our body in a stable, upright position. And this is so we can use our arms and hands freely to do activities and tasks. So this would include things like being able to sit up straight and do writing, or being able to sit upright at the dining table and eat, or even playing. And without a strong, stable base, it's very hard for a child to focus or use their hands effectively. So what we might need to look for is the child slumping over the desk? Are they leaning to one side? Do they look awkward in their movements, or are they uncomfortable in their seat? Is the child fidgeting or shifting because they can't maintain that steady position? When the child's sitting at the table, we want to ensure that the child can have their feet flat on the floor, or even provide a footrest if they can't reach the floor. We want to ensure that the child's hips, knees, and ankles are all at 90 degrees, and that the table is about 5 centimeters from the bent elbow, so that they can have a good stable base for their forearm to rest on while they're doing their writing. When a child's sitting on the floor, what we want to see is that children, when they sit crisscrossed or cross-legged, it gives them more stability than if they're side-sitting or if their legs are straight out. And we might want to give them a back support. So we might want to getting them to lean up against a wall, especially for those kids that tend to fatigue quickly or they need help sitting upright. All right, core stability. So core stability is the strength and the control of the muscles inside the belly, the back, and the hips. And it helps a child stay upright and balanced during sitting and movement tasks. So when a child has poor core stability, it can impact their posture, which will then obviously impact their fine motor skills. So what we might look for is if we're noticing a child slouching or leaning on furniture, if they're wriggling or frequently falling off chairs, they get tired very quickly during tabletop tasks, or they have difficulty with balance and movement coordination. Some strategies we can help support these kids is playing games that work on core strength. So doing animal walks, playing games of tug of war, lots of climbing games. You can even try balance games or yoga. And you could even use a wobble cushion or a therapy ball for sitting practice to help develop core stability. Arms and shoulder stability. This is the strength and control in the shoulders and the upper arms, which ensures that you have a stable base for steady hand tasks, like if they need to do drawing or cutting. What we might start noticing if a child has difficulty is if they're holding the pencil very tightly or very loosely. They might use whole arm movements to write or draw. They may raise their shoulders when they're writing and using scissors, so they're fixating at their shoulder joints. And they're getting quite tired quickly when they're using their hands. Some strategies that you might be able to use would be things like wheelbarrow walks. We know how fun that is with our kids, and make it fun for them, get them to race, get them to collect things and balance bean bags on their backs. Climbing or hanging from monkey bars are really good for developing shoulder stability. Getting children to draw on vertical surfaces, so using a chalkboard or an easel. Even getting them to draw, using shaving foam on the shower window or on general windows, using crayons as well. Animal walks and crawling games, painting and drawing on large surfaces on the floor, even while lying on their tummy. So all those will help develop arm and shoulder stability. Then we go down to our hand and our finger strength. So this is obviously the ability to squeeze and pinch and grip objects with control and endurance. It's required for everyday activities, like if they need to do buttons, for example, or if they need to do their zips. It's also important for things like grasping, so climbing on monkey bars and being able to hold their grip using their finger and hand strength, and even using scissors and cutlery. So when kids have really good hand and finger strength, it helps develop that stamina and endurance that they need to complete tasks, like, for example, writing a full page of writing. So what we might look out for is if these children are struggling to open up containers or use scissors, they might have difficulty using cutlery or even holding small items, and they get quite fatigued during drawing and coloring tasks. Some activities that you can try with your kids is Play-Doh. Play-Doh is a really lovely one. You can use putty or even clay. Squeezing sponges, so getting them to transfer water from one bucket to another, using spray bottles, even tongs during play, threading beads or lacing activities. Playing with pegs is a beautiful one, so getting them to hang up washing with you, or they can pretend to hang their doll's clothes up. Lego is a beautiful one, even using tweezers, so picking up small like pom-poms, for example. Rolling marbles up across a wall, so using their fingers to roll a marble against a wall, just using their middle index finger, the middle and the index finger and their thumb, so using that to roll up. You can even draw like a little path for them on the wall. All right, then they start developing the pencil grip and in-hand manipulation. So pencil grip is using the thumb at the end and the index finger, or the pencil grip, to pick up small items. In-hand manipulation is the ability to move objects around in the hand. So, for example, like turning a pencil or moving coins from the palm to the fingers. If kids have difficulty with the pencil grip and in-hand manipulation, they will struggle to pick up small objects. They need to use both hands for tasks that usually only need to use one. And they might have difficulty adjusting items like a pencil for positioning their items in their hand. So some strategies that you could use is picking up small items like beads or buttons with their fingers, using coin banks or small pegs or even sticker games, rotating pencils or turning items in the one hand during play. A lovely one that I love to do is scrunching paper into a ball and then getting them to unscrunch the paper using this one hand. It can get quite tricky and tiring for the hand, but it's a lovely activity to do with your kids. And even trying to flip or roll or shift objects in the hand, so doing a bit of like pencil gymnastics. Hand dominance. So this is when a child uses or consistently prefers one hand for tasks. A strong hand preference helps with skill development. So if children are using both hands simultaneously during their development, they're not necessarily skillfully develop the one hand for efficient tool use. So what we might notice is a child might start swapping hands during writing tasks. So they might get tired with the one and then flip over to the other. They might use the non-dominant hand for trickier tasks where you would expect them to be using their dominant hand. And there might be a delayed or very unclear hand preference past the age of 4 or 5. So some strategies you can help support the child to develop dominance is encouraging them to use one hand for feeding or drawing, for example. You could often put an object in the one hand for them to hold so that you don't have to constantly tell them, but it might just be easier for them to do that because they already have a hand that is occupied. Setting up tasks on the preferred side of the body. Avoid switching utensils or tools between hands mid-task, so trying to get them to consistently use one hand throughout the whole task, and then over time to see which hand they favor for tool use and try and skillfully develop that one hand. Bilateral crossing and midline crossing and bilateral integration. So this is essentially midline crossing is the ability to move our hand or foot or eyes across the imaginary midline of our body. Bilateral integration is being able to use both sides of the body together, like, for example, holding paper with one hand and then cutting with the other hand. If a child has difficulty in this area, you'll see that they start switching hands when they're reaching across the body. So they might reach for an object that's on the left-hand side with their left hand transferred to their right hand instead of reaching across with the dominant hand, for example, the right hand to reach for an object. They'll have difficulty with tasks like tying shoelaces or using scissors effectively, and they'll avoid crossing their midline. So some strategies that you can work on is encouraging activities that cross the body. So in the picture you can see, for example, drawing a big rainbow. So getting the child to stay in one spot and then draw a rainbow from one side to the other. Clapping games is a beautiful idea. So kids will obviously have to reach across their midline to clap hands on the opposite side. Drawing a figure of 8, tracing on the side. So figure of 8 on the side and moving across the midline of their body. And marching with opposite hand and foot. And then also trying to get them to engage in tasks that require them to use both hands. So for example, like threading beads or playing musical instruments. So hypermobility is quite a common thing that we see with our children. So this is when the child's joints are extra flexible. So you can imagine that it makes it really hard for children to control movements and keep their stable grip. Now, what we might look out for is, if you can see the pictures on the left, is very bendy fingers. So we find that these kids tend to tire quite quickly during handwriting and fine motor tasks, and they need to often lean on surfaces like at the table or back or something to support them in the upright position. So essentially what we want to do is we want to protect those joints. So when a child has hypermobile joints, we want to ensure that we are protecting those joints to prevent them from getting painful. So you might want to start strengthening their hand and their core muscles through play. So you might want to start doing like lots of climbing activities with them, using putty is an example, just to help start developing their hands. Using a pencil grip or a thicker pencil for better control. So you can see there, those are called egg pencil grips, and it just helps develop a better grasp for them, so they're not applying as much pressure on those hyperextended finger joints. Thicker pencils are also really good for these kids because it gives them better control. We need to ensure that we are providing them with more rest breaks during fine motor activities, and what we want to then do is build their stamina slowly over time. All right, pencil grasps. Okay, so pencil grasps is essentially how a child will hold a pencil. A mature grasp is when the child is able to use their thumb and their first two fingers, so the index and the middle finger, to control a pencil. If a child has an incorrect grasp, it can often lead to fatigue and also causing that unnecessary stress on joints, making it very difficult or very tiring for them to engage in handwriting. So things we might observe is fisting of the pencil, if they're using more than 3 fingers, or even using the whole arm to move their pencils, and if their hands getting quite tired. On the page, you can see the typical pencil grasp development that we might see. So at age 12 to 15 months around age 1, you'll see that mass palmar grasp, and then they might move into a digital pronate grasp from 2 to 3 years. Between 3 and 4 years, you want to start seeing them starting to use at least 3 or 4 fingers on the pencil with their finger pads. And then start transitioning into a tripod grip. And then by 5 to 6 years, we should start seeing a more dynamic pencil grasp. So some activities that you can help encourage this is getting them obviously to draw on vertical surfaces to develop shoulder strengthening. Using small, short crayons or broken pencils can often help promote a better grip, because there's no room for them to move their fingers into an awkward position. They have to grasp it with their little fingers. You could provide them with pencil grips or triangular grips. Please do this in collaboration with your OT, because they might not be ready for this. You want to ensure that we have first developed those posture and those core muscles before we move into pencil grips. And obviously play games, like we mentioned previously, that strengthen the muscles. All right, then pre-writing skills. As I mentioned previously, before handwriting, we want to ensure that kids are developing those pre-writing skills and those movement patterns. So these are basic lines and shapes that we need before learning to write. So developmentally, we'll learn how to do vertical lines, and then horizontal lines, and then circles, and then we'll start learning to do diagonals, and then those pre-writing shapes of like squares and triangles and crosses. A child needs to master these shapes before they can progress into writing or forming letters and numbers. Another key area to consider is left-handedness. So left-handed children often need extra support to develop a comfortable and efficient writing style, because obviously they're living in a right-handed world. So everything is right-handed, from a pencil sharpener to the way that we open our water bottles, to how whiteboards work, right? So obviously with a child being left-handed, they'll be rubbing out their work as they go on a whiteboard. But I just wanted to make a note that the probability of a child being naturally ambidextrous is very low. So about only 1% of our population is naturally ambidextrous. So if you find that your child is using 2 hands or is swapping between the two, the chances are is that they aren't ambidextrous. There's a good chance that they just have delayed dominance. So when a child is left-handed, what we might need to look out for is whether they're using a hooked grasp. So you can see on the left hand, the image is how they hook their grasp over, or that can cause quite an awkward posture and difficulty using scissors and tools. So there's some simple strategies we can encourage, is things like slanting their paper to the right. So tilting that top corner down or the left corner up. Getting the child to sit on the left side of the desk to avoid elbow bumping while they're writing, encouraging them to use left-handed scissors. It's actually really tricky. If you want to try and use a right-handed scissors and cut with your left hand, you'll see what I mean. It's quite tricky using the wrong pair of scissors in the wrong hand. And if they need to, try and hold the pencil slightly higher up so they have a more room to see what they're writing. So yeah, as we said, movement is one of the most important and powerful tools for children to have. So movement supports brain development. When children can move, their brains can receive that information to help them build those neural pathways. So it's important to start with the body before moving to the hands. Incorporate lots of fine motor play, practice grasps, support midline and bilateral integration, use lots of multi-sensory approaches, lots of opportunities to develop those pre-writing shapes and patterns and tracing. Please make sure that we're focusing on posture and positioning. If they don't have a good posture or good positioning, they're not going to be able to use the extremities efficiently and effectively. And always praise their effort over neatness. So if we are constantly focusing on their neatness, kids will become quite avoidant of engaging those fine motor tasks. So if you are concerned, I would start by chatting to your child's educator. They may have also noticed some signs and can share some observations that they have noticed across settings. If you observe your child is avoiding drawing tasks or writing, are struggling to use cutlery, are struggling to button their jumpers or do their zips or tie their shoelaces, if you notice that they're becoming quite tired or frustrated during tabletop tasks, if they're using quite a fisted grip or an awkward hand position, it might be worth investigating further. You can also chat to an occupational therapist. So OTs are highly trained to assess fine motor development and to be able to identify those underlying factors that impact fine motor skills or handwriting. So they'll be able to assess their strength and their coordination and assess whether they have sensory needs. And it's really important that early intervention can make a big difference. So essentially what we're wanting to do is close the gap so that they're not becoming frustrated when they get to school. And I often say to parents and educators, trust your guts. If something doesn't feel right, even if others aren't concerned yet, it's always okay to seek support. Okay, but thank you so much, everybody. I'd love to open the floor for some questions, even just comments on what's really working for you, or if you have any questions about children that you're wondering about. Please ask any questions. All right, I can see there is one question here by Regani. It says, Kate, can you please give tips for children 12 to 24 months old who you can see are trying to use the tripod method in holding things? Thank you for that question. So as we could see from the pencil grasp development at this stage, I'll bring that slide up for you here. So between 12 and 24 months, they're still in a transitional grip pattern. So it's not expected for kids at this age to be using a tripod grasp, but if it is something that they're really trying to do, just using small object manipulatives in their play. So for example, posting little coins into a money box, for example, or picking up beads, or just manipulating small little objects. If you wanted to start, putting pipe cleaners through holes, for example, those are all little activities that you could use to develop that tripod grip. But beautiful that they're trying, and I would just encourage, just continue building on all those little activities that we spoke about to develop using 3 fingers together. I think I can see any more questions, but thank you everyone for joining tonight. I hope that was really helpful and just helps us think a little bit more beyond handwriting. It's such a complex task and is really important for us to see beyond the handwriting and make sure that our kids are developing appropriately in all those other areas, so we can ensure success when they get to school. A lot of our kids are having difficulty with handwriting in school these days. We get a lot of referrals for handwriting, and it's often not handwriting that is the problem. It's often more than that. It's often the postural control. It's often poor strength, poor core strength. There's often a lot more that's involved to develop handwriting skills. All right, so I can see, hi Kate, I have a question. If a child is doing excellent in other practical life activities, but not interested in holding the pencil, could you tell me how old the child is? 4.5, okay. At 4.5, we often find that kids are still very play-based. So if they're not interested in holding a pencil, what other tools can we use to mimic that? So could we do more painting? So painting will obviously then involve also using a shaft, for example, for drawing, or even getting to draw in the sand with sticks. If they are still in the kinder year, there is still time, and a lot of kids are still very play-based, especially our boys. They do tend to avoid all these fine motor skills. But obviously at this stage, if they're still in the kinder years, obviously just encouraging and having those opportunities for play. You can even use interest areas. So if they're really motivated by monster trucks, often we'll have a little monster truck that they can trace, or they can color in, for example. But if they've got really good core strength, and they're doing really well, being able to manipulate other small items, they still got time. Remember, our little kids are 4.5 still. Remember that picture we saw of the hand developing? So they've still got time to develop. Yeah, and if we feel like this is an area that's still that you're still concerned, in the first couple of weeks of prep, then it might be something worth exploring. But at this stage, if they're doing beautiful in other aspects, I wouldn't be concerned at all. Thank you so much, guys. I hope you all have a wonderful evening. And yeah, if there are any more questions, please feel free to pop them through via email, or you can give us a call if you are concerned about your child's development.